The first of 3 days of presidential voting in Egypt, where the suspense is over turnout, with Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's only rival plucked from obscurity for the occasion. Yes, Egypt is voting in a presidential election. You're watching France 24. It's 6:30 p.m. in Cairo. Let's cross to our own Chris Moore for a special edition. Chris.
Thanks very much, Francois. Yes, voting getting underway in Cairo and around Egypt today. Here in the capital, images of President Sisi are ubiquitous. Those of his last-minute and sole rival, not so much. We're going to be picking through this poll with two journalists and Egypt watchers based here in Cairo. To my right is Lina Atala. She's editor-in-chief of Egyptian online newspaper Bada Massa, which, despite being blocked on various occasions, continues to dig where other Egyptian media perhaps dare not. Also joined by Alexandre Bouchianti. His career as a journalist here in Egypt started in 1972.
I was 17.
Under Anwar Sadat, and as such, you've seen a lot of different eras: the Mubarak era, the revolution, etc. Before we move on, however, let's take a look at the man who is expected to win re-election. This from France 24's Catherine Clift.
A man of two personas. For some, an anchor of stability. For others, an autocrat. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi rose to power through the ranks of Egypt's military. Appointed commander-in-chief of the army in August 2012 by then-President Mohamed Morsi, who he would help to topple 9 months later.
This roadmap includes the temporary suspension of the constitution, the holding of early presidential elections, with the president of the Constitutional Council who will supervise the interim, pending the election of a new president.
A month after the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces took power with Sisi as defense minister, a bloody crackdown against Morsi's Muslim Brotherhood movement began, when at least 800 protesters were killed in central Cairo, according to Human Rights Watch. Then in March 2014, Sisi resigned to run for president. With his charismatic presence and emotional speeches, many Egyptians saw him as the strong leader needed to bring back stability to the country.
I stand before you for the last time in a military uniform, after deciding to end my service as defense minister and commander of the armed forces. With all modesty, I nominate myself for the presidency of Egypt.
Sisi went on to win 96% of the vote. His priority to fight Islamist terrorism and stabilize the Middle East have made Sisi a key intermediary for the West, particularly in the Libyan crisis. At home, though, global critics accuse him of a return to the authoritarian rule the Tahrir Square revolution fought to escape. In this latest presidential election, all but one opponent have dropped out of the race, though the president's campaign team say none have been prevented from running.
We're watching Egyptian election coverage from Cairo. Let's move on by talking to Lina Atala, an independent journalist, a rare quantity here in Cairo. How have you been covering this election?
So given the fact that, as we all know, the results of these elections are quite expected, so there isn't a whole lot of curiosity when it comes to our work as journalists. However, as we all know, the turnout is a central area of interest for us in these elections, so we're really trying to gauge the extent to which Egyptians are interested in yet another election since 2011, who's voting, who's not, for what reasons. So that's
what kind of forecast do you have there? Do you think people are going to go to the polls?
It is very hard to forecast since it's the first day in 3 days, and we're pretty sure that we've seen in the last days that there has been some mass mobilizations to get Egyptians in groups from different factory spaces and companies and so on to go vote. So it's hard to tell how it's going to be like. My sense is that Egyptians might be a bit too tired of this exercise at this time around, but would that reflect on the official turnout percentages? I'm not sure about that.
Okay, Alexandre Bouchianti, how do we get here to the situation where the president is facing just the one challenger who came in kind of late in his relatively unknown?
Well, Egypt until 2005 did not have a person election for the president. It was a referendum, yes or no. And most of those referendums, you had results with more than 90% for the president. Even Nasser, it was more than 99%.
The president himself has said he would like to have seen more candidates.
He said so, but the machine seems, in a way, to have been back in the 60s. It all looks like that, although they cannot go back to the 60s. Things have changed, communication, people have changed. There was the 2011 upheaval. You cannot forget that and decide that it did not happen. But in a way, the regime decided to work that way. Who exactly in the regime? Is it Sisi himself? Is it somebody else behind?
You talked before about the importance of the role of the army, the importance of the army in the Egyptian system.
Yeah, there is what's called the SCAF, the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. And this SCAF became the president of Egypt in 2011 when Mubarak decided to give up power. He gave it to the SCAF it was totally unconstitutional. He had a vice president. Normally it should have gone to the vice president, and since then this SCAF has been president for 2 years until Morsi was elected. So those militaries that were in power in 1952 were once more in power. And it's difficult once you tasted power to leave it.
You know, the role of the army here, it is important, and it does change. For some of the people who were out protesting during the revolution, not so long after, were almost cheering them on as they deposed President Morsi.
Yeah, right now the military is taking on a more direct and exposed position with regards to power. We know that Egypt has had for years an extremely powerful military institution. Right now the change is basically manifested in this power being far more on the facade, with very little political mediators in the middle and with almost an absent political space. And I'm afraid to say this, even though we have an election today. So this is the main transformation in how we can make sense out of the military rule nowadays in Egypt.
You're part of, for want of a better phrase, the Tahrir generation, the people who were out protesting in 2011, liberals, reformers, people who wanted to see fundamental change here in Egypt. How is the state of mind among people like that now?
I think many of us are finding it quite hard to have a space where we can be proactive, where we can advance our demands, our interests in seeing this country differently. Nevertheless, some of us continue to struggle. Others, have been having to face more difficult fates, such as imprisonment for voicing openly their political views. And there is a lot of opting out, and I would say that the opting out and the withdrawal is perhaps the most spread and diffused phenomenon of Egyptians who were active back in 2011, mainly because the sense of hope is almost not there anymore for a lot of these people. So.
Alexander Bouchanti, how does the poll now, the atmosphere now, the feeling now compare to what you've seen? You've been through all of the eras of recent Egyptian history.
Yeah, well, it looks like the impression I have, like 2014, when Sisi got 97% and the participation was 47%, taking into consideration that the world record in Egypt was 52% with Morsi and Shafi in 2012. It never happened before, although officially it was 85%, 90% participation. So the fact that will people participate or not, it's quite unpredictable, because you have this sort of government machine that is still very powerful. You have a big number of bureaucrats in Egypt. You have all the university, for example, Al-Azhar University decided to give a vacation to the students to be able to vote. You have the possibility of having incentives either by businessmen for people voting, or even by officials saying that the village that will vote the most will have his sewage done before the others, or a new school. So this can work. This can work and change, and maybe for the regime, it's surely they need more than 45% to say we made it.
Maybe, yeah. Trying to get people out to vote. Well, when President Sisi came to power, he promised that his #1 priority was to sort out the country's economic problems. Part of the reason behind those protests back in 2011. He has introduced a reform program in line in part to agree with an IMF loan. But how does that affect ordinary Egyptians? This report from our team, Nadia Blettery, Claire Willow and Yuka Roya.
Ahmed Hussein is a taxi driver in Cairo. He's 26 and works 7 days a week. Yet in recent months he's found it difficult to survive financially. That's because last summer the government cut petrol subsidies in half. Now Ahmed must pay full price to fuel his car. He has lost a quarter of his revenues and currently makes the equivalent of €130 a month.
I can't even try to save money to get married or put some money away in case I get ill, for example, or even just to live a decent life. What's more, I broke up with a woman I was in love with because of money issues.
Egypt undertook dramatic reforms to meet the demands of the International Monetary Fund. But the devaluation of the Egyptian pound caused massive inflation, 30.7% in 2017. The price of food skyrocketed. While shopping at a local market, like many Egyptians, Ahmed is forced to tighten his purse strings.
To feed a family of 4, right now it costs you €5 a day for low-quality meals. It used to cost only €1.50.
Economic hardship is now hitting the middle and working classes. Young people are particularly affected, with more than 26% unemployed. Ahmed meets with his brother and his cousins in their family's apartment. All are struggling to plan their future.
Today, young people can't build their lives, nor get married, find a job or do anything else. Having a job is what really allows you to do everything else. If young people had the chance to work, their futures would be a lot brighter.
The Egyptian economy grew 4% in the last financial year, but a key part of the population is excluded from the benefits.
Looking at some of the economic problems facing Egyptian people there, Lina Tala, does it in a way feed into President Sisi's own argument, namely that at the moment, given the economic conditions, the political history we've seen in recent years, he is the only force really capable of uniting the country and pushing through reform?
This is definitely being used in Sisi's discourse, that he is on a big project to restore the economy of the country and to put it on a completely different track, which is true in the sense that Egypt is subscribing to what the government calls a reform program in light of the IMF loan that was agreed upon last year, or the year before last year. But at the same time, the extent to which this is really responding to a long-standing demand that dates back to the Mubarak time, which is how the poor, the lower income classes' lives and livelihoods would be improved. That question remains completely unanswered at this point, in light of all the measures that have been taken. All what we're seeing is actually a reproduction of the Mubarak time phenomenon, which is that the numbers are improving, the indicators are doing better, but they are not reflecting on people's lives necessarily.
Alexander, you've been telling us that you feel that on this front, on the economic front, the true test is yet to come and it's not so far away.
Yeah, it's in July. The deal with the IMF is to get rid of any subsidy on energy, so oil, electricity, gas, and so on. So prices will go up, naturally. So will people accept that or not? Till now, the government have managed to play that game in quite an efficient way. They are preparing even the ground by giving subsidies to the poorest with a special card for the poorest of the Egyptians. They played this game for years and years. They know how to play it. But there is something else important. It's the Egyptians that are living abroad, especially in the Gulf countries, that are sending money, huge amounts of money, $30 billion in 2017. It's as much as tourism, Suez Canal, and Egyptian exports together. So that helps downstairs, but the real problem is, even if the economy gets better, it doesn't get better for the poorest. So you have an informal economy, unless they tackle with this informal economy that makes 60% of the people work. People will
what about these? It's no secret, and it's not unusual for the IMF to demand an end to kind of status policies. But the same thing, one thing I've been very struck by on Egyptian TV is this constant coverage of big state-led projects, at times with the army involved, expanding Suez at a new capital, these kind of things. Is that going to work?
Well, at least Suez Canal, the big projects, they work. They work in the sense that they are finished. The Suez Canal have been doubled. The new capital is going on. The new capital is doing money because people are investing there. Egyptians love to have a piece of land, a house. So they are putting money there. You have roads, for example, very good, but roads going almost nowhere. New roads that costed billions, going practically nowhere to Al-Daba. It's a road. If you have 1,000 cars a week, it will be marvelous. So you are pumping money out of the economy and putting it in a place that is not really essential.
Okay, well, Lina, moving on a little bit now. It does seem likely, as we've been saying, that President Sisi will be re-elected. Where do you see things in 4 years' time?
It is hard to predict, given the fact that we haven't seen much politics in the last few years. We've seen only policies from the authorities and from Sisi himself. So it's very hard to predict where it's going to go. I do not expect, for example, a political opening, sadly. It is hard to expect if we are...
Is that something which parts of the population, that they tacitly accept that at the moment? They think the challenges are too big?
I think for the people, of course, the economic situation is the priority, and also on that front, it is very hard to expect any major transformations in how things have been. If anything, Sisi did prepare the population for the need for them to sacrifice, given the challenges that Egypt would be facing in the coming years and months. So it is very hard to expect something so different than just more of the same, really. More of the same challenges, maybe an aggravation of some of them, particularly the political and the economic crisis.
You still feel that mentalities did change in 2011?
I'm sorry?
You still feel that mentalities did change in 2011?
I do feel that people's relationship to power and relationship to the state and to the authorities have changed, and this is a main takeaway from 2011. I do feel that it cannot be taken for granted anymore that Egyptians are going to be okay with oppressive rulers. And, you know, we're yet to see the new manifestation of this change of mentality post-2011.
Very quickly, before we go, Alexandre, Egypt in 4 years' time.
Well, if the 2019 year you have things going better and they manage to begin to have an economy going downstairs with the people that really need it, maybe Egypt will have a chance to change, but it will be still a change within a sort of boundary that doesn't give all the potentiality that Egypt has.
Alexandre Buchianzi, thanks for your thoughts. Thanks to Lina Attal. That's all we have time for from Cairo. We're going to hand you back to Paris now and Francois.
Many thanks, Chris Moore, Lina Atala, and Alexandre Buccianti in Cairo.